Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I think we might as well get started. My name is Fiona Trigg, I'm Acting Senior Curator at Acme, and this is Seb Chan, who's the Chief Experience Officer. Yeah. So this is just a session to tell you a little bit more about the Mordant VR Commission, and most importantly for you to have the opportunity to ask questions. It's really hard with Commission guidelines to cover everything, so please feel free to ask questions after we've spoken briefly, and also to contact me after the session. My contact details are on the webpage. So I'm just going to do a really brief introduction, then we're going to hear from Seb, and then we're going to cross to Mark in Sydney.
Yep.
Mark Pesquet is one of the people on the panel. He's a noted futurist. He's an adjunct professor at UTS. He's been working in VR for a really long time and has a fantastic sense of the historical import and the future potential of VR, which is what we're interested in. So the main kind of through line of the Commission is to support Australian visual artists to create bold new works using VR technologies. This information is on the website, but I'll just talk through some of the key points. So the Commission is really aimed at visual artists who have a practicing kind of, or have an established practice. It's not really aimed at the student level, and it's not particularly aimed at existing VR companies, although we do imagine that artists will want to work with existing VR companies in the creation of the work. But it's really aimed at visual artists who are really fascinated by the potential of VR or AR technologies. We're open to any kind of reality, and who are keen to bring their aesthetic and their critical thinking to the world of VR, and to see what can happen when they bring the ideas that they've developed in their years of practice to meet with this emerging and new technology, and to see what can come out of it. So it can be an individual artist, it can be a small group, or it can be an artist who's already combined with a VR practitioner. If the artist or the individual doesn't know anyone working with VR, we can help broker that relationship. But I guess we're assuming that people who are applying for this commission are already fascinated to some extent by VR and already have some knowledge of it. If not, we really suggest that you go and do some research and really look into what's happening in VR in the art world and in the commercial world at the moment, and kind of make your application kind of sing with sort of contemporary relevance. So we've changed the dates a little bit from last year. We hope to have a project completed by the end of December this year. But of course, we're open to a little bit of flexibility on that regarding, depending on the kind of commitments of the artists involved. So in summary, we're looking for something that's centred around mixed reality. It doesn't have to be virtual reality. It can be augmented reality. It's ambitious and experimental, explores the limits of technology. I don't really know what that phrase means, but, I guess the panel will be looking for ideas that they haven't really seen before, that things that are completely engaging and catch them by surprise and are kind of compelling in their in the quality of their ideas and their thinking, and that also will find an audience, and that audiences will love to engage with. And of course, the applicant has to be Australian. So the Mordant Commission is set up to run over 3 years. The first year was won last year by Christian Thompson with Bay Guardia, sorry, badly pronounced, Singing Desert, and Christian's currently in early stages of production of that work, so we hope to have that completed by mid-year. And then there'll be another commission next year, which is the final one. So it's funded by Simon Mordant and his family, and the City of Melbourne, and some funds by Acme. Just a quick history of some of the projects that we've supported at Acme. Stuck in the Middle with You, which was a dance piece. On the left-hand side, you'll see participants downstairs watching the work, which was enabling you to become part of a dance performance put together by the Sydney Dance Theatre. We showed Collisions by Lynette Walworth, which I'm sure you're aware showed at Sundance a couple of years ago. We didn't commission this work, but we exhibited it, and that had a kind of dedicated gallery, and it was a timed experience so that the 12 or so people who were watching it could all come in at the same time, watch the work together, be kind of guided through it, and then have a chance to talk to each other about the experience afterwards. We also commissioned Earth Visual and Physical Theatre to make a VR work. This was just last September school holidays, from their prehistoric it was called Prehistoric VR. It was based on a stage show that they did using giant puppets, kind of underwater characters, and this work was aimed at children or young people. On the left, you can see there's some kids using the work. We set up a kind of diving tank theatrical setup in the gallery. Ghost Toast and the Things Unsaid was created by Sandpit, who are at Acme X, with Google Creative and Grumpy Sailor, and that was also based on a theatrical work, so you could take on one of either two characters in a kind of little booth through the VR experience. We also have a VR lounge down in Screen Worlds, which is currently playing Turning Forest, which is by Vertov. Again, we didn't commission that work, it was commissioned by the BBC. That's an animation-based interactive video, and Vertov, again, are Acme X residents. So we've shown a range of works, and we're really, I'm not showing you these to be at all prescriptive. We're very open to whatever ideas come across the table. Just some really key works that caught my eye. I'm not really an expert on VR, but Thresholds by Matt Collishaw, which was a VR rendering of an existing exhibition made in space. As you can see, they're the white tables, which came alive with objects through the VR experience. This work, which I haven't seen yet, which I would love to see, by Alejandro Inurito, Blood and Sand, which is obviously a very ambitious work that is beyond the scope of the finances of this commission, but just a fascinating way to use a kind of spatial GPS system that invites you to take on the role of a Mexican refugee trying to cross into America and being chased by the Border Patrol. The Enemy, which is a really fascinating work made by a political journalist, which invites you into an environment where you get to meet with two combatants on different sides of a conflict, like an Israeli and a Palestinian, and kind of be part of a dialogue with those two. And Laurie Anderson's recent work, The Chalk Room, which is a graphics-based VR experience, which she said she was thrilled by the opportunity of giving people the chance to fly, and that's the feeling that she wanted to pursue in that work. There were just some recent examples of kind of art-based works that I would love to be able to show here at Acme that we haven't shown.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think that's occurred in the last year since the first commission, and I sat on the panel with Mark Pesci and others, is that we've really seen VR in the general sense move beyond 360 video. So there have been a lot of proposals, and there have also been a lot of works made that are basically 360 video, and I think we're seeing a real shift towards both works that require more presence, like a physical presence, even down kind of to the work that we had from Earth, that the diving tank and the prelude to putting on the goggles for what really was a 360 video work, was as much part of the work as what occurred in the 360 video space. So looking beyond 360 video, I think is one of the real opportunities. The Matt Collishaw work and the Inuritu work as well both use backpack-based VR or VR that works in an kind of tethered way, which I think opens up more opportunities for a spatial work. And when I think about Christian Thompson's proposal, if that technology had been present a year ago, that work might have also evolved in new ways. So I think there's real opportunities with exploring the spatial elements. We had a really strong series of proposals last kind of year, and really there were some that were heavily lent on the technology side and some heavy on the conceptual side, and I think the concept amongst the panel is the real key to this, having a really strong concept and showing also that you've spoken to production partners or potential production partners to give some coherence and reality to that concept, and the way it may be able to be made or produced is really key too. And thinking about how that work, whatever it is, may be presented is probably also an important thing. whether if it's a 360 piece, whether you are looking for wide distribution, maybe through a partnership with a distribution channel, or whether it's a spatial work that requires a physical setup. Those are all pretty important things. And it's interesting to have Mark here too on the line from Sydney, because one of the fascinating things that came out of last kind of year's assessment was discussions of the ethics of VR. So where artists are able to provoke debate and critical thinking around technology. We really like that idea, and we really like to celebrate artists that push on some of the ethical questions VR and the technology companies and the historical roots of VR might throw up as problematic in 2018 now. God, time moves fast. But yeah, so, and the other thing I guess was interesting last kind of year, we had a couple of proposals that were more AR based, and I think that there's still lots of potential there. And also some other works that I've seen recently have also done away with any sense of visual in VR. So what is the VR experience for a visual artist that perhaps has no vision at all? What might that even be? So we're looking for really strong concepts and a sense that you've approached potential production partners. We don't expect deals to be sealed or anything like that, but definitely that you have a sense of where things are heading and what possibilities might be worth exploring, and what you would do with this commission that you couldn't otherwise do. We're really excited about supporting things that would otherwise be difficult to get support for. I think with that, it's probably worth throwing to Mark before questions. Mark.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Sounds like it can. All right, good. Thank you, Steph. Thanks, Fiona. So just to sort of briefly recap, I've been working in the field for about 28 years, not quite all the way back to the beginning, but pretty far back to the beginning. And 24 years ago, this week created something called VRML, which is basically the granddaddy to all of the web technologies that use 3D, that uses 3D these days. And I have to say, it was very nice to work on the panel last year because it had really meant that we had found ourselves in a time when these tools are now accessible to artists. And I'll talk about this a little bit, but there was a time when really you had to be a millionaire artist to be able to get the kind of equipment and resources. And that's no longer the barrier. We can give you a reasonable grant and expect reasonable results for that. So the barrier is no longer financial. The barrier is now around the creativity. And I think the challenge for artists is to think beyond the familiar. I want to talk about two works that touch on this and to sort of give you some context. And it's funny because Fiona and Seb have both mentioned Kearney e Arena, Flesh and Sand, which is the new piece by Inoritu. And although we don't think of him as a mid-career artist because he's won an Academy Award for Best Picture and Best Director, he is very much in terms of the arc of his career, because he's probably going to be working for another 40 years. He is a mid-career artist, and he has chosen to risk working in a new medium. And that's pretty much the definition of what we're looking for the VR grant. Now, the thing that I want to stress, and I want to come back to this over and over again, because I think this is the key. The key to an effective work in either VR or AR is to remember the body. It's about embodiment. And here, we're going to flip over now because I got to show you some images from my own computer now. There we go. So get that going. Okay, so now you're seeing, hopefully, are you now seeing this? Yes, okay, now you're seeing the screen. So that's just a piece of artwork from Kearney e Arena. Now, Kearney e Arena focuses on the US-Mexico border because Inoritu is Mexican, and about people who are trying to move across that border. And it's interesting because it could just be a full VR experience, but in fact, what they do is you are led into a room, and it's a waiting room, and you don't really know how long you're going to be there, and all you can do is sit in this room and wait and take off your shoes and your socks. And this room is freezing cold. And the reason that this room is freezing cold is because when people are caught by border control and taken into custody, they are often placed in a freezing room for 24 or 48 hours. It's not quite torture, and yet it's a way of basically making the experience incredibly uncomfortable for these people. And so Inarritu is giving you an embodied experience as part of the overall experience. He's starting with shocking your body. Then you go into another space where you're wearing, again, this backpack VR. Now, here's a quote from someone who is in the work. "Two attendants helped me slip on a backpack and an Oculus Rift headset, but this was perhaps the least technology-focused VR experience I've ever taken part in. There were no controllers to fiddle with." And you have to remember, if you're making these works, you're going to have to, either people have to learn how to use these works very quickly, or you have to make them so easy to use that it's just straightforward. So there were no controllers to fiddle with, no visible sensors in the room. No one asked me if I'd tried other headsets before. It was simply a matter of slipping the Rift on and being informed that I'd be guided gently by a human hand if I started to get too close to a wall. And then it starts to actually use the features of cinema, where you have these dreamlike shifts, you have things appearing in the middle of the space, you have context shifts, and you have this idea of the immigrants running around in the desert sand and being caught by border control. And I wish I could show you a lot of this. I wish I could show you a lot of this more than just that picture, which is someone inside the experience. Here's another thing. It's extremely difficult to document a VR work, because what you're documenting is essentially experiential, and not just experiential, but experiential and particular, and also completely immersive. So there's very little effective documentation of this work other than narratives from people who have been through the work and some screenshots which don't give you any sense of the immersion. But again, there's this idea that he's placing you in a space and in a body and in a story. And because those three elements are coming together, he's been able to stretch the language that we're using in the field. Okay, so that's a big piece. Lots of people have seen that. He got a Special Academy Award for that, all very well. Then there was a piece that was at the Sydney Festival that I saw about a fortnight ago called Whist. Now, Whist, as they say, was inspired by Sigmund Freud's real case studies. It's a theater meets VR experience that invites you deep inside the unconscious mind. The primal and the high-tech emerge in an immersive 360-degree experience. Instinct and desire drive you in 76 possible directions. You take an illuminating journey inside a fictional family's dreams and fears. Now, in practice, what that meant is that you're wearing a headset, and it's a smartphone-based headset, so a Gear VR. And because that has a pass-through camera on it, there are times when you can actually see the space around you, and you can progress from point to point in the space to find the next point. And as soon as you find the next point that you've been directed to, a 360 immersive video segment starts. So it's basically triggering on your movement in space. So you're going back and forth between being in real space and participating or being immersed in these narratives that are very dreamlike, very interesting, and also have paths that are particular to the people who are participating. So I was in a room full of people, and because of the path that I'd taken, I actually finished the experience long after everyone else, because for some reason I was taken on a different path. And it leveraged the dance and the movement skills of the artists who are creating this work. This is Esteban Formi and Ao Nakamura. They're mid-career artists working in the UK, and they're doing a new and original work in a new and original medium. So again, taking pretty much the same parameters that we have at the Mordant Commission. Now, was the work perfect? It probably wasn't perfect, but it was trying to do something new. That's really important. It's really important because so much remains to be done here. And so you can have very weird dreamlike sequences and have this experience of maybe almost watching something almost like you're sneaking a peek at it. And it's important to just try stuff. It may not always work, but it's important to try. But what I want to do is I want to set a bar for you. And I want to finish with this example. So we'll go back 23 years. And we saw the very first major VR work. It's a work called Osmose. And it was shown at Acme back in 2000. It was created by Shar Davies. She is a mid-career, or at the time she was a mid-career artist, but she also had the full resources of a major production company behind her, so she could spend 2 years creating the work. And I advise you to look at it on YouTube. If you just type in Osmose in YouTube, this video will come up. You can have a look at that. And the VR itself looks somewhat primitive by today's standards, but that took a $500,000 supercomputer, and it's less powerful than your iPhone is. Now, the most important thing that Davies did beyond creating the work was she created an entirely new interface to the work. That interface uses breath and balance because she had just learned how to scuba dive. And so what she did was she used exactly the same interface that a scuba diver uses to raise or lower their body in the water column. Because what happens is a diver breathes in and they float up in the water column, or they breathe out and they float down in the water column by changing their gravity. So she invented a way to navigate in 3 dimensions using what is a very simple and mostly mechanical interface. And this is, again, to come back full circle, this is where we come back to the body. And this is the important thing, because whatever approach you take to your work, remember the body. Remember the body, because the body is the thing that is the most important there. Now, talking about technology, it's important to work with someone who has a strong background in the technology, but let the technology be the handmaiden to the artwork. It's very important to start from a vision and let the tech support that vision. Now, sometimes that means it's going to fall over. Sometimes the technology is not going to let you do what you want it to, but sometimes, if you're lucky, you will break through and you will create something new, and you will be adding new words to the newest language that we have, immersion. Okay, back to you guys.
Open up to any questions that you have. I'm just going to have a microphone, and if you could use the mic so that Mark can hear you. Oh, do you want to do that? Okay. Thanks, Samita. Who has a question? Anything? Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions. One, you were talking about ethics around this, and I'm not familiar with what the ethical issues might be, so if you could elaborate on that. And also just where the work is going to be shown here. Is it going to be at Acme downstairs in the small exhibition space downstairs, or is there some particular location here at Acme that the work's going to be shown, or can it be shown anywhere, or anyway, that's...
Let me tackle that second one first. Where will the work be shown? It depends on what kind of the work is and where it is best shown. It may not end up being shown here at all. It may be best shown through another platform or in another place. It may also be a site-specific work that requires a place that isn't here, or if it is is best done through a particular gallery setup. We're interested in what that might be. You'll note that we haven't committed to showing the work, and depends on really what that work is and what it requires. We're pretty interested in getting it out to as many people as possible, and I think through this we also aim to use our relationships and partnerships to help you find opportunities should you be successful. That may be through our partnerships with festivals around the world or around Australia. It may also be through the networks the assessment panel and other staff have here at kind of the institution. Or if it's a 360 video piece, perhaps it's a partnership with a media platform, The Guardian, the New York Times, Fairfax, who knows? But it depends what it is. And we try not to... We've tried hard to not skew it towards one or another. We've tried to keep it as open as possible. We also know that these works sometimes take extended periods of time for particular reasons to finish off, and so committing to exhibiting at a particular time is difficult until the work is finished. Back to the first question around ethics, I think Mark touched on this with his notion of embodiment, and I think as soon as you're talking about a user's body, visual artists often don't have to think about the viewer as much. as perhaps other artists do. And I think because this is aimed initially at visual artists, this may be challenging to think about some of the ethics that may apply when you are putting someone else into and being the subject of the work. That may be about the age appropriateness of the works, the technology appropriateness to certain bodies, or the normalisation of behaviours, or if you're putting the person in the shoes of another person, what the ethical questions about consent might be there. Many things that might come up which in a standard visual arts practice may not be top of kind of mind. And there were a couple of examples that the committee last kind of year talked a lot about, proposals that had included biosensors and other ways of gathering feedback and control data from the user, the subject or the player, and how that data may be stored, manipulated, or consented to being collected. So if you were, say, exploring ways of controlling a VR experience using signals from galvanic skin kind of response, measuring stress levels or other things, what might that get you to question? I think that's just important to raise, that as you embody the viewer or the player, the user, new ethics discussions emerge.
If I can say a few words here.
Yeah.
I think perhaps a good guideline is the Hippocratic Oath, first, do no harm. And remember that there are many different bodies, and everyone's body is different on a different day, and that VR and AR are very intimate technologies. The relationship they have to the body is fundamentally closer than I think all of the other art forms that we've played with. And so the affect may be quite unexpected, and it may be very different from person to person. And so we really have to understand that. Now with WIST, my WIST experience ran about an hour. An hour of VR, even for me, is a huge amount. For someone who hasn't really had any VR at all, it would probably be overwhelming. And it was, I don't think it was intentional, other than they wanted you to proceed all the way through the work. So again, you have to think about the nature of the person and the nature of their experience as they're entering your work.
Also, just to clarify what Seb said, it is stipulated as part of the commission that the work comes into the Acme Collection, so that will definitely happen. And as he explained, the display of it is case by case as the work evolves and as our exhibition program evolves. But we will make every effort to display the work publicly. Yeah. Anyone else with a question? Yeah.
I was just thinking about the process last year. Do you have what will the process look like this year in terms of, if you guys have questions, will you come back to us? Or?
Oh yes, we have actually changed the process, which I haven't detailed on the website because we were just finalising the details of that. But this year we're going to, all of the panellists will read all of the applications and meet as they did last year, and everyone gets, all the works get given a lot of thought and a lot of attention. And then from that process, we're saying 3 finalists, it might be 4, might be 2, just depending on the fall of the works, will then be given the opportunity to come and present personally to the panel.
Great.
So,
are we going to say who the panel is? Can we do that?
Yes, we can do that. It's Seb, it's Mark, it's Katrina Sedgwick, the CEO of Acme, it's Simon Mordant, who's the philanthropist. He's kind of chairing the panel. It's Natalie Kane, who is from the V&A, curator of Digital Wonder or
digital media, I think.
Digital
design.
Very knowledgeable about technology, and Rebecca Coates from the director of the Shepparton Art Gallery, and I'll also be on the panel. So it's a mixture of people from a very art background and from a tech background.
Yep.
Excellent, thank you.
Yes, Natalie Kane is the new addition to, this year's international person, and she has a background. She's just kind of joined the V&A, and I'd encourage you to have a look at other festivals and other things she's curated in her career, because she has a very interesting and diverse background across media arts and other emergent things.
Yes, Alison, go.
I'm also thinking about work in progress, or having some kind of prototype or mock-ups of the work.
Yeah, that was my question.
Sorry, you were asking about presenting a prototype of the work? That's an interesting, it's really the commission, part of the guidelines say it's to make a new work, it's not to fund retrospectively. So if it's a project that's already well along the way, it's probably ineligible. I know that can be a little bit of a grey area.
Yeah, there were a couple in last kind of year that we let go through further in our process because they demonstrated that the Commission would significantly transform or change a work that was already partially in progress, but not significantly in progress. This Commission is really to take an idea that hasn't fully formed into a new work.
Prototypes, would that be helpful?
Look, I think maybe at the second stage. At the first stage, I really stress a strong concept is really important. And I would say the visual arts, mid-career visual artist is an important piece of this. And what that might be, this isn't so much for a mid-career media artist, it is more for a visual artist to explore a new practice or medium. That doesn't mean collaborations and partnerships and collectives can't form out of this. In fact, that's possibly quite an exciting new opportunity.
Yeah.
It's about new opportunities.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Cool.
Anything else to add, Seb?
No, I think it's... yeah,
another
okay,
question,
yeah.
sorry.
Is it worth pursuing an idea that was submitted last year if it's pushed on? Is that worth doing, or are you looking for new ideas?
It's worth doing if it takes into account where technology and society have moved in the intervening period. I think that's key to it, not knowing what the idea was. I think that would be understanding how things have shifted in the past year is pretty important. And I think there's been a lot of movement in VR and AR. As Mark said, the tools have come further down in price. It's become relatively consumerised. The PlayStation VR experiences, the Vive, the Oculus, they're all doing quite interesting things now. And there's lots of stuff in this space. There's lots of stuff in particular themes, and we're probably looking for new things that aren't in existing themes. Mark, would you concur with that perhaps?
Well, I mean, I think part of the reason we're doing the briefing this year is to really give artists, I guess, the best possible frame for being able to talk about their work, because we felt as though we hadn't given the artists enough illumination to be able to do their best in the proposals. And so if what you're hearing now and what you've learned in the last year really helps you clarify, then I think maybe that's worth going back to. But I also reckon that, yes, you can take a look at the new things that are going on, the new world that we're in, because the world that we're in now is quite different even than the world a year ago in some not so pleasant ways. And maybe those will be reflected in the work as well. So I don't think we can say yes or no around that. I think what we can say is you can't just tweak. If you're going to do something like that, go and hit it with a hammer, beat it until it hurts a little bit, and then bring it back in. So really sort of, bring it through the fire and create something new.
As with any commissioning process, it's really competitive. I think there were about 80 applicants last year. And you know, a certain percentage of those are incredibly strong. So it really is about how the idea jumps off the page and announces itself as something that must be paid attention to, that is really clear and fascinating and engaging and believable that it's a real thing. You know, it has to kind of have its own sort of voice and its own strength that is immediately apparent to a panel of vastly different people who will be reading it.
Yeah, I mean, it's also probably worth saying that broadly, if I was to characterise the two types of applications last year, there were ones who were very able to write about a visual arts, from a visual arts background, who could articulate a concept very well, but were a little weak on production and technology and the opportunity. And from the technology side, they were very clear on the technology, but not very good at expressing the concept in artistic terms. And those perhaps on the technology side need to be able to position themselves as mid-career artists, more so than perhaps media designers or media producers. So that's a lot in how you present your CV and the works you've previously done, the works you've previously exhibited. What is a work? What is exhibiting a work? Visual artists are much more able to draw on a gallery-based practice and talk about their works as if they're a gallery-based practice, even when perhaps they're not. Technology, media originating people probably need to find how to tweak how they present, how they talk about their past work. A lot of technology and media designers have done equivalent work, but just don't talk about it in the same framing. So think about the framing, because this is quite explicitly for mid-career visual artists, and that does tend to hint at a gallery-based practice.
So artists making a shift in their work.
Yeah, it's about making a shift. So if you may want to look at how you write about yourself if you're not from that background. That doesn't... Mark, is that a fair read of that?
Oh, I think you hit the nail exactly on the head. You know, they're not different worlds, but they do use different languages. And because this is very much an art and art world-centered piece, speak in that language and speak clearly in that language, and you'll be heard.
Cool. And, you know, Fiona's up for questions throughout the process too, so just do make contact.
Don't hesitate to call me about anything or email me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We want a really great work to happen out of this, and we will try to nudge you towards the right things.
Yeah.
We really will, because we want more than 80 awesome things to come through.
We do.
So it's a more difficult. It was a very difficult, Mark and I. It was a very difficult and tight experience last assessment, and we'd like that to be even harder. We'll just have better coffee, right, and all those things. Cool.
Okay, so unless there's any other questions, we might wrap it up for tonight. And thank you very much for coming.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Cheers.